Chapter 1. The Accident. Bobby Jones swung his golf club and hit his ball very hard. Did the ball fly straight and upwards? No, it did not. It raced along the ground and into the sand in the bunker. Bobby, the fourth son of the Vicar of Marchbolt, a small seaside town in Wales, swore. He was a pleasant-looking young man of about 28, and his eyes had the honest brown friendliness of a dog's eyes. "I get worse every day," he said to himself sadly. Bobby then hit his ball really hard twice. The third time, he successfully hit the ball out of the sand, and it now lay a short distance from the hole he had been aiming at. His friend, Dr. Thomas, a middle-aged man with a cheerful face, had reached it with 2 good shots. "Well done," said Bobby. They went on to the next hole. The doctor went first. A nice straight shot. Bobby sighed, shut his eyes, raised his head, lowered his right shoulder. Everything he should not have done, and hit a beautiful shot down the middle of the course. His sad expression changed into one of great happiness. "I know now what I've been doing wrong," said Bobby, quite untruthfully. Full of confidence, he again did everything he should not have done, and this time there was no miracle. The ball went to the right instead of to the front. "If that had been straight," said Dr. Thomas with obvious relief. "If," said Bobby bitterly. "Hello, I thought I heard a shout. I hope the ball didn't hit anyone." He looked to the right, but looking into the setting sun, it was hard to see anything clearly, and there was a mist rising from the sea. The edge of the cliff was a few hundred yards away. "The footpath runs along there," said Bobby, "and I do think I heard a cry. Did you?" The doctor had heard nothing, but they walked towards the cliff edge. Far below, the sea sparkled in the sun. "Doctor!" Bobby exclaimed. "What do you make of that?" 12 yards below was a pile of what looked like clothes. "By Jove! Somebody has fallen over the cliff!" There was a difficult path down, and the 2 men made their way carefully to the dark pile. It was a man of about 40, and he was still breathing, though unconscious. The doctor knelt to examine him. Then he looked up at Bobby and shook his head. "He is dying, poor fellow. There is nothing I can do for him. His back is broken. Well, I suppose he wasn't familiar with the path, and when the mist rose, he walked over the edge. I'll go and make arrangements to have him brought up. It's possible he may recover consciousness before the end, but very likely he won't. Will you stay?" Bobby nodded. "Is there really nothing that we can do for him?" The doctor shook his head. "Nothing, I'm afraid." As the doctor climbed the cliff, Bobby lit a cigarette. What terrible luck! A sudden mist, a slip, and life came to an end. Healthy-looking fellow, too, with a deep suntan. A man who had lived an out-of-door life, abroad perhaps. Bobby studied him. The curly brown hair, the strong jaw. An attractive face. As he thought that, the eyes suddenly opened. They were a clear, deep Chapter 2. Concerning Fathers. Sadly, Bobby took a silk handkerchief out of the dead man's pocket and put it over his face. There was nothing more he could do. Then he noticed that something else had come out of the pocket. A photograph. It was a woman's face. A fair young woman with wide-apart eyes. She seemed little more than a girl, certainly under 30, but it was the slight sadness of her beauty rather than the beauty itself that attracted Bobby. Gently, he replaced the photograph, then sat down to wait for the doctor. The time passed very slowly, or at least so it seemed, because he had just remembered something. He had promised to play the church organ during the 6 o'clock service, and it was now 10 minutes to 6. He wished he had sent a message with the doctor, because his father was a worrier. "He won't know whether to start the service or not," thought Bobby, "and he'll get so upset, he'll get stomach pain. Nobody over 50 has any sense. They worry about things that do not matter. Poor old Dad, he has got less sense than a chicken." He sat there thinking of his father with a mixture of affection and irritation. His life at home seemed to him to be one long sacrifice to his father's old-fashioned ideas. To Mr. Jones, who was aware of how often Bobby was irritated by him, it seemed to be one long sacrifice on his part. Bobby heard something above him and looked up thankfully. But it was not the doctor. It was a man whom Bobby did not know. "I say, has there been an accident? Can I help?" He was a tall man with a pleasant voice. Bobby got up, but he could not see him clearly because it was getting dark. He explained what had happened and that help was on the way, and asked if the other man could see signs of people arriving. "No one," the man said. "You see," went on Bobby, "I have an appointment at 6. "And you don't like to leave?" "No," said Bobby. The other man seemed to understand. "Look here, I'll come down and stay till help arrives." "Oh, would you?" said Bobby gratefully, and soon the two men were face to face. The man was aged about 35 and had a rather weak face, which would have been greatly improved by a little moustache. "My name's Bassington French. I came down to see about a house," he explained. "What a terrible thing to happen. Did he walk over the edge?" Bobby nodded. "It's a dangerous bit of path. Well, thanks very much. I've got to hurry. It's very good of you." "Not at all," the other man said. "Anybody would do the same." At the top of the cliff, Bobby ran. It was 5 minutes past 6. Chapter 3. A Railway Journey. The following morning, Bobby went up to London to meet a friend who was thinking of opening a garage and who was hoping that Bobby would be working there with him. 2 days later, he went to get on the 11:30 train home. The train was moving, and he jumped into the first carriage he saw. It was a first-class one, and the only passenger was a dark-haired girl smoking a cigarette. She had on a red skirt, a short green jacket, and a little blue hat, and, despite sad dark eyes, she was very good-looking. "Why, it's you, Frankie," Bobby said. "I haven't seen you for ages." "Well, sit down and talk." Bobby grinned. "My ticket is the wrong colour." "That doesn't matter," said Frankie kindly. "I'll pay the difference." Just then, a large figure in a blue uniform appeared. Frankie smiled at the ticket collector, who touched his hat respectfully as he took her ticket. "Mr. Jones has just come in to talk to me for a short time," she said. "That won't matter, will it?" "That's all right, your ladyship." "What can be done with a smile?" said Bobby, as the ticket collector went out. Lady Frances Derwent shook her head thoughtfully. I think it's Father's habit of tipping everybody really well whenever he travels that does it. I thought you had given up Wales for good, Frankie. Francis sighed. After the party I went to last night, I thought even home couldn't be worse. What was wrong with the party? Nothing. It was just like any other party, only more so. It was to start at the Savoy at 8:30. We had dinner, and then went on to the Marionette Club. There was a rumour it was going to be raided by the police, but nothing happened. It was just boring. And we drank a bit, and then we went on to the Bullring nightclub, and that was even more boring. And then we thought we would go and have breakfast with Angela's uncle, and we were even more bored, so we went home. Honestly, Bobby, it's not good enough. I suppose not, said Bobby, resisting a feeling of jealousy. Never in his wildest moments did he dream of being able to be a member of the Marionette or the Bullring. His relationship with Frankie Derwent was a strange one. As children, he and his brothers had played with the Derwent children at the castle. Now they were grown up, they rarely met. On the few occasions when Frankie was at home, Bobby and his brothers would go up and play tennis. But Frankie and her two brothers were not asked to the vicarage. No one said anything about it, but it was thought that the young Derwents, who were of so much higher a social class than the Jones family, would not enjoy themselves in such simple surroundings. But Bobby was very fond of Frankie, and was always pleased on the rare occasions when they met. I am so bored with everything, said Frankie in a tired voice. Aren't you? No, I don't think I am. My dear, how wonderful, said Frankie. By the way, what's all this about a man falling over the cliffs? Dr. Thomas and I found him, said Bobby. How did you know about it? I saw it in the paper. Look. She pointed to a paragraph headed, Fatal Accident in Sea Mist. The victim of the tragedy at Marchbolt was identified late last night from a photograph he was carrying. The photograph proved to be that of Mrs. Leo Cayman, who identified the deceased as her brother, Alex Pritchard, recently returned from Siam. He had been out of England for 10 years and was just starting on a walking tour. The inquest will be held at Marchbolt tomorrow. I suppose I will have to give evidence, Bobby said. How exciting! I don't suppose there will be anything exciting about it, said Bobby. We found him. Then he died about a quarter of an hour later. Rather unpleasant, said Frankie. Did you see the sister? No. I had to see a friend of mine about a garage business we're starting up. You remember Badger Beeden? He's got funny eyes and a silly laugh. Ho, ho, ho! Frankie frowned, trying to remember Badger. He fell off his horse when we were kids, continued Bobby helpfully. He got stuck in the mud head down, and we had to pull him out by the legs. Oh, said Frankie, I know now. Did he also run a chicken farm which failed? That's right. And then they sent him to Australia, and he came back? Yes. Bobby, said Frankie, you're not putting any money into this garage business, are you? I haven't got any money to put in, said Bobby. Just as well, said Frankie. Badger has tried to get hold of someone with money to put some in, but it isn't as easy as you would think. When you look round you, said Frankie, you would not believe people had any sense at all. But they have. At last Bobby understood the point of these remarks. Look here, Frankie, he said. Badger is one of the very best. They always are, said Frankie. Who are? The ones who go to Australia and come back again. How did he find the money to start this business? An aunt died and left him a garage for 6 cars. And his parents gave him £100 to buy second-hand cars with. You'd be surprised how cheap second-hand cars can be. I bought one once, said Frankie. It's a painful subject. Let's not talk of it. So, you're looking for work? What did you want to leave the Navy for? Bobby's face reddened. Eyes, he said sadly. You always had trouble with your eyes, I remember. I just managed to get accepted by the Navy. Then service abroad in the strong light made my eyes worse. So, well, I had to leave. It's such a shame. I could have carried on perfectly well. They look all right, said Frankie. She looked straight into his honest brown eyes. So you see, said Bobby, I am going to go into business with Badger. It was just after 5 o'clock when they reached Salem, which was the station for Marchbolt. Our driver's meeting me, said Frankie. I'll give you a lift. Thanks. That will save me carrying this thing for 2 miles. He kicked his suitcase. It's 3 miles, not 2, said Frankie. 2 miles if you go by the footpath at the edge of the golf course. The one where... Yes, where that poor man went over the edge. I don't suppose someone pushed him over, asked Frankie. Good Lord, no. Why? Well, it would make it much more exciting, wouldn't it? Said Frankie casually. Chapter 4. The Inquest. The inquest on Alex Pritchard was held on the following day. Dr. Thomas gave evidence about the finding of the body.
Now, as to the cause of death, Dr. Thomas, there were no signs of violence that might have been made by another person?
Asked the coroner.
I can only say that the injuries are fully explained by the body hitting the rocks 12 yards below. Is suicide a possibility? Questioned the coroner. That is perfectly possible, said the doctor, but whether the dead man walked over the edge or threw himself over, I cannot say.
Bobby was called next. He explained that he had been playing golf with the doctor and had thought he had heard a cry. The coroner asked, A cry for help? Oh, no, sort of surprised, said Bobby. The sort of noise someone might make if a golf ball hit him unexpectedly. Or if, in the mist, he took a step over the edge when he thought he was on a path? Yes. Mrs. Leo Cayman was called next. Bobby gave a gasp of disappointment. The photo from the dead man's pocket must have been taken some years ago, but even then it was hard to believe that the wide-eyed beauty in the photograph could have become this heavily made-up woman with dyed hair. Time, thought Bobby, was a very frightening thing. Meanwhile, Amelia Cayman of 17 St Leonard's Gardens, Paddington, London, was giving evidence. The dead man was her only brother, Alexander Pritchard, and she had last seen him the day before the tragedy. Did he seem in a happy and normal state of mind? Oh, yes. Alex was always cheerful. He was looking forward to his trip in very good spirits. What was your brother's profession, Mrs. Cayman? The lady seemed slightly embarrassed. Well, I can't say I really know. Prospecting, that's what he called it. He was very rarely in England. You know of no reason which would cause him to take his own life? Oh, no. It must have been an accident. And as she said this, she began to cry. The jury's verdict didn't take long. Death by misadventure. Chapter 5. Mr. and Mrs. Cayman. On arriving back at the vicarage, Bobby found Mr. and Mrs. Cayman in the study with his father. Ah, the vicar said, here is Bobby. Mr. Cayman rose and came towards the young man with an outstretched hand. Mr. Cayman was a big, red-faced man who seemed to be friendly, but whose gaze was cold and dishonest.
"I came down with the wife,"
said Mr. Cayman, shaking Bobby's hand painfully hard.
"I had to support her, you know. Amelia's naturally upset."
Mrs. Cayman sniffed.
"My poor wife's brother died, I think we could say, in your arms," continued Mr. Cayman. "Naturally, she wanted to know all you could tell her of his last moments."
"Absolutely," said Bobby unhappily.
Poor Alex,"
said Mrs. Cayman, wiping her eyes.
"If he left any last words, naturally, I want to know."
"Of course," said Bobby, "but he didn't."
"It was best," said Mr. Cayman seriously, "to pass away without pain. We should be very grateful for that, Amelia." "I suppose I must," said Mrs. Cayman, and sighed deeply. "Poor Alex, such a fine man."
"Yes, wasn't he?" said Bobby, as he accompanied the Caymans to the front door.
"And what do you do with your time, young man?" inquired Cayman.
"I spend most of my time looking for a job," said Bobby. He paused. "I was in the Navy."
Hard times these days," said Mr. Cayman, shaking his head. "I wish you luck."
"Thank you very much," said Bobby politely. As he watched them walk down the drive, various thoughts raced through his mind. The girl in the photograph's smooth, pale face with the wide eyes, and 15 years later, Mrs. Cayman, with all signs of youth and innocence, disappeared. How sad it was. It was a result, perhaps, of marrying an obvious bounder like Cayman. Bobby sighed and shook his head. "That's the worst of marriage," he said sadly. "What did you say?" Bobby became aware of Frankie, whose approach he had not heard.
"I was making a general comment," said Bobby, "on the destructive effects of marriage."
"What effects are you talking about?" Bobby explained how badly he thought the woman had aged. He found Frankie unsympathetic. "Nonsense! The woman's exactly like her photograph."
"When did you see her? Were you at the inquest?"
"Of course I was at the inquest. There's so little to do down here. An inquest is a perfect gift. Of course, it would have been better if it had been a mysterious poisoning case, but one mustn't be too demanding when these simple pleasures come one's way."
"What bloodthirsty instincts you have, Frankie. And I don't agree with you about the female Cayman. Her photograph was lovely."
"Touched up, you know, fixed, that's all," interrupted Frankie.
"Well then, it was so touched up you wouldn't have known it was the same person."
"You're blind," said Frankie.
"Where did you see it?" Bobby demanded coldly.
"In the local weekly Times."
"It was probably badly printed."
"It seems to me you're absolutely mad," said Frankie crossly. "Over a painted-up, tired old bitch. Yes, I said bitch, like Mrs. Cayman."
"Frankie," said Bobby, "I'm surprised at you using such bad language, and in the vicarage garden too."
"Well, you shouldn't be so ridiculous." There was a pause. Then Frankie's sudden bad mood disappeared. "What is ridiculous," she said, "is to argue about the damned woman. I came to suggest a game of golf. What about it?"
"Okay, you're in charge," said Bobby happily.
Friends again, they set off together, and the recent tragedy was forgotten, until Bobby, about to hit his ball, suddenly gave an exclamation. "What is it?"
"The Caymans. They came round and asked if Pritchard had said anything before he died, and I told them he hadn't. And now I've just remembered that he did."
"It's not one of your brightest mornings." Well, it wasn't the sort of thing they meant. That's why I didn't think of it." "What did he say?" asked Frankie curiously. "Why didn't they ask Evans? Then he died, poor man." "What a funny thing to say," said Frankie. "I don't understand why you're worried." "I just wish I'd mentioned it. You see, I told them he had said nothing at all." "Well, it's the same thing," said Frankie. "I mean, it isn't like, 'Tell Gladys I always loved her,' or 'The will is in the wooden desk.' It couldn't be important." "I expect you're right," said Bobby. But he didn't feel comfortable about it, so that evening he sat down and wrote. "Dear Mr. Cayman, I have just remembered that your brother-in-law did say something before he died. The exact words were, 'Why didn't they ask Evans?' I apologise for not mentioning it this morning, but I didn't think it was important at the time, and so, I suppose, I just forgot. Yours truly, Robert Jones." 2 days later, he received a reply. "Dear Mr. Jones, many thanks for repeating my poor brother-in-law's last words so carefully, in spite of their unimportance. What my wife hoped was that her brother might have left her some last message. Still, thank you for being so thorough. Yours faithfully, Leo Cayman." Chapter 6. End of a Picnic. On the following day, Bobby received another letter. "It's all fixed," Badger wrote. "I bought 5 cars yesterday for £15 the lot. At the moment, they don't actually work, but we can fix them, I think. I thought of opening up a week on Monday, and I am relying on you being here, so don't let me down, will you? Yours ever, Badger." Bobby told his father that he would be going up to town to take up the garage job. This did not please the vicar, who knew Badger Beeden. And then, on the Wednesday, Bobby received another letter. It was from the firm of Enriquez and Dallo in Buenos Aires, and it offered Bobby a job with a salary of £1,000 a year, an unbelievable amount of money. The young man thought he must be dreaming. The letter said that an ex-naval man was preferred for the job, and Bobby's name had been put forward. His acceptance had to be immediate, and Bobby must start for Buenos Aires within a week. "Well, I'm damned," said Bobby. "Bobby! Sorry, Dad, I forgot you were there." Mr. Jones cleared his throat. "I should like to point out to you—" Bobby felt he had to avoid a long speech from his father. He managed to do this by making a simple statement. "Someone's offered me 1,000 a year." The vicar remained open-mouthed. Then he said, 1,000? It's impossible." Bobby was not hurt by his father's disbelief. "They must be complete idiots," he agreed, smiling. "Who are these people?" Bobby handed him the letter. The vicar peered at it suspiciously. "Most remarkable." "Madmen," said Bobby. "Ah, my boy," said the vicar. "It is, after all, a great thing to be an Englishman. Honesty, that's what we stand for. This South American firm realizes the value of a young man who is sure to be honest." "But, Dad," Bobby said, "there are a lot of Englishmen. Why me?" "Your superior officer in the Navy may have recommended you." "I suppose," said Bobby doubtfully. "It doesn't matter anyway, as I can't take the job." "My dear boy, what do you mean?" "Well, I've taken the job with Badger." "Nonsense, my dear Bobby. This is serious. The garage project is a mad idea. You must give it up." "I can't, sir. I've promised. I can't let Badger down. He's counting on me." The vicar left the room in anger, and Bobby sat down to write to Enriquez and Dallo, refusing their offer. Later, on the golf course, he told Frankie about it. You would have had to go to South America? She asked.
Yes.
Would you have liked that?
Yes. Why not?
Frankie sighed. Anyway, she said firmly, I think you made the right decision.
I couldn't let Badger down, could I?
No. They walked on in silence. I'm going to London tomorrow, said Frankie.
Tomorrow? Oh, and I was going to suggest a picnic.
I'd have liked that. However, it's arranged. But we can meet in London. Will you be there soon?
On Monday. But, well, it's no good, is it?
What do you mean, no good?
I'll be working as a mechanic, and you will be with your town friends. I mean...
Bobby, said Frankie, I suppose you're just as capable of coming to a cocktail party and getting drunk as any other of my friends.
Bobby shook his head. Frankie, you can't mix people from different social classes.
I assure you, said Frankie, that my friends are very mixed.
You're pretending not to understand.
You can bring Badger if you like. There's friendship for you.
Look here, Frankie, it's no good, and you know it isn't. It's all right down here. There's not much to do, and I suppose I'm better than nothing to go around with. But I know I'm just a nobody.
They walked together in silence to the clubhouse. Well, said Frankie, holding out her hand. Goodbye, my dear. It's been marvellous to have you to make use of while I've been down here. I'll see you again, perhaps, when I've nothing better to do.
Look, Frankie.
His words were drowned in the noise of the Bentley's engine, which Frankie had just started. She drove away with a wave of her hand.
Damn, said Bobby.
Perhaps he hadn't explained things very well, but what he had said was true. Perhaps, though, he shouldn't have put it into words. The next 3 days seemed very, very long. The vicar was silently disapproving of Bobby's decision to go and work for Badger, and on Saturday, Bobby could stand it no longer. He got Mrs. Roberts, the vicarage cook, to give him some sandwiches, and, buying a bottle of beer at the pub, he set off alone for a picnic. He had missed Frankie badly these last few days. Bobby walked a few miles, then, feeling tired and hungry, he stretched himself out on the ground and wondered whether he should eat his lunch first and go to sleep afterwards, or sleep first and eat afterwards. The decision was made for him because he fell asleep without noticing it. When he awoke, it was 3:30, so he ate his lunch hungrily. With a sigh of satisfaction, he unscrewed the bottle of beer. Unusually bitter beer, but refreshing. He lay back down, suddenly tired again. Sleep overcame him. Heavy, endless sleep. Chapter 7. An Escape from Death. Frankie's Bentley stopped outside a large old-fashioned house. She jumped out and, turning, lifted a large bunch of expensive flowers from the back seat, then turned again and rang the doorbell. A nurse answered the door. "Can I see Mr. Jones?" inquired Frankie. The nurse looked at the Bentley, the flowers, and Frankie with interest. "What name will I say?" "Lady Frances Derwent." The nurse was thrilled. A lady. Her patient must be more important than she thought. She showed Frankie upstairs into a room on the first floor. "You've a visitor to see you, Mr. Jones." "Gosh," said Bobby, very much surprised. "Frankie!" "Hello, Bobby. I've brought flowers that are more usually seen at a funeral, but the choice was limited." "Oh, Lady Frances," said the nurse. "They're lovely. I'll put them into water." She left the room. Frankie sat down in a visitor's chair. "Well, Bobby," she said, "what's all this?" "You may well ask," said Bobby. "My body took in 8 grains of morphia, no less. They're going to write about me in the British Medical Journal." Do you know, my girl, that half a grain of morphia is a fatal quantity? I ought to be dead 16 times over. It's true that recovery has been known after 16 grains. Still, 8 is pretty good, don't you think? This nursing home has never had a case like me before. How nice for them. Isn't it? You'll see, I will be famous, he said, and began telling Frankie every detail of his treatment. That's enough, said Frankie, stopping him. I don't want to hear about how stomach pumps work. And to listen to you, one would think nobody had ever been poisoned before. Very few people have been poisoned with 8 grains of morphia and got over it, Bobby pointed out. Really, Frankie, you're not impressed enough. It must be very annoying for the people who poisoned you, said Frankie. I know. What a waste of perfectly good morphia. It was in the beer, wasn't it? Yes. They analysed the drops of beer left in the bottle. You see, someone found me sleeping like the dead and got frightened. He carried me to a farmhouse and sent for a doctor. Is there any clue as to how the morphia got in the bottle? Frankie asked. None. They've opened other bottles at the pub where I bought it, and everything's all right. Then someone must have put the stuff in the beer while you were asleep. That's it. Frankie nodded thoughtfully. Well, she said, that decides it. That man, Alex Pritchard, was pushed over the cliff. What? Said Bobby, surprised. Darling, it's obvious. Why should anyone want to kill you? You're not the heir to a fortune. No one benefits by your death. There's revenge, of course. You haven't seduced a chemist's daughter, have you? Not that I can remember, said Bobby. I know. One seduces so many people that one can't keep count. But I would guess that you've never seduced anyone at all. You're making me embarrassed, Frankie. And why must it be a chemist's daughter? She would have free access to morphia. It's not so easy to get hold of morphia. Well, I haven't seduced a chemist's daughter. And you haven't got any enemies that you know of? Bobby shook his head. Well, said Frankie, what do the police think? They think it must have been a madman. Nonsense. Madmen don't wander about with morphia looking for bottles of beer to put it into. No, somebody pushed Pritchard over the cliff. A minute or two later, you came along, and the murderer thought you saw something that you didn't think was anything, but which really was something. That sounds confused, but it's really logical. If you get 2 strange things happening in a quiet place like Marchbolt... Wait, there's a third thing. What? That job you were offered. It was strange, you must admit. You can see what I'm thinking. They first try to get rid of you by offering you a job abroad. Then, when that fails, they try to kill you. Isn't that rather extreme? Oh, but murderers are very extreme. Well, Frankie, what on earth am I supposed to have seen? That is the question, admitted Frankie, getting up from the chair. I don't know. Shall I come and see you again tomorrow? Please do. By the way, you're back from London very soon, aren't you? My dear, as soon as I heard about you, I raced back. It's most exciting to have a romantically poisoned friend. Well, I'll come tomorrow. Do I kiss you or don't I? It's not catching, said Bobby encouragingly. Then I'll do my duty to the sick thoroughly. She kissed him lightly. The nurse came in with Bobby's tea as Frankie went out. Isn't she nice? The nurse said. Not a bit haughty, is she? Oh, no, said Bobby. I should never call Frankie haughty. I said to Sister, I said, she's as natural as anything, not a bit as you would think a lady would be. I said to Sister, she's just like you or me, I said. Silently disagreeing violently from this view, Bobby made no reply. The nurse, disappointed by his lack of response, left the room. Left to his own thoughts, Bobby went over in his mind the possibilities of Frankie's amazing theory. He decided, reluctantly, as it made him feel important, against it. With a sigh, he picked up the previous week's Marchbolt Weekly Times. A moment later, he pressed the emergency bell, and a nurse came running. "Ring up the castle," cried Bobby. "Tell Lady Frances she must come back at once." "What do you want to see me about so urgently?" Frankie demanded. Bobby waved the Marchbolt Weekly Times. "Look, Frankie, this is the picture you said was touched up." Underneath the somewhat blurred photograph were the words, "Photograph found on the dead man, and by which he was identified. Mrs. Amelia Cayman, the dead man's sister." "That's what I said, and it's true." "No, you see, Frankie, this isn't the photograph that I put back in the dead man's pocket." "That man who stayed with him, what's his name?" said Frankie. "Bassington French," said Bobby. "He must have exchanged them."